Welcome back to A Flourishing Start. Today's topic is one that everyone can relate to, and that's visiting your local library. While some may first think of libraries as a quiet space, the reality is that these spaces can also be amazing hubs for helping families navigate resources and find a community to learn and decompress with, and for young children to run around, read, and play together. I clearly remember I first visited the library when I was still in diapers, so my mother says. And I just really remember growing up that the library was a pillar for me and my family who had just moved to Oakland. My mom and dad came from the country of Mexico, and so this library just seemed like a natural place for my mother to take us, kind of just a way to learn about the culture, but also just being a place that has books, I think was really appealing to her. And to me, I would explain the libraries as a quote unquote third place. And so I wanted to start off the episode by sharing a little bit more about what I mean when I'm saying third place. And so, from this article that we'll link in the show notes from today.com, it's called Do You Have a Third Place? Here's Why Finding One is Key for Your Well Being. And I'm quoting from that article, and it starts off with So, your first place is where you live, your second place is where you work or go to school, and your third place can be virtually any location that doesn't fall into the first two categories, like coffee shops, parks, community centers. The only real requirement is that nobody is forcing you to show up. And I can guarantee nobody was forcing my mother to show up to the libraries. But yet again, here we were in diapers, being at the library my entire childhood. And so, with that, let's learn together about what resources and supports are available through local libraries and how engaging with your community through libraries and reading can benefit early childhood mental health and well being. To help us dive into this topic, I'm excited to welcome two guests today, Marie and Anthony. Marie is a mom to a 1-year-old child. She is also one of my amazing co-workers at the National Center for Youth Law, where she is a development manager and supports the organization's fundraising efforts for our work across immigration, child welfare, education, mental health, legal advocacy, and ending commercial sexual exploitation. Welcome, Marie, to the podcast.
Thanks, Esme.
And second, we have Anthony. Anthony has worked at Oakland Public Library, aka OPL, for 20 years. Most of this time has been in East Oakland. Anthony is a community engagement coordinator at a local Oakland Library branch. Anthony and his team of 4 have created community responsive initiatives, including the Father Circle and the Bike Fix program. Some highlights of his work are laundromat story time in Fruitvale and fundraising to do book giveaways that are reflective of East Oakland residents. Anthony is also an amazing father of twin 7-year-olds who are both avid readers and users of the library. Welcome,
Thank you.
Anthony.
Thank you.
And let's just, I wanted to go ahead and start there. Anthony, can you start by sharing what a public library is and what a public library means to you?
It's an interesting question, especially following the third place or the third place idea. You know, for me, when I first came to the Oakland Public Libraries, my experience before this was really, I wasn't a library user, but the meaning changed for me based on an experience. When I moved to Oakland in 2003, I was looking for work and I was in the public library using their career computers. And I was getting a vibe from the spaces. And before that, I had worked in community centers in Santa Cruz County, and I worked with incarcerated youth and doing community engagement kind of work. And I realized that libraries were the spaces of engagement, hubs for the community to come to. So for me, what a library is, is this incredible institution space with resources, information, books, 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 computer access, as well as space. A space that doesn't require membership or fees. It's free spaces, spaces that are, you know, more and more less common. I guess is that if I could say that
Mm,
they're so having these spaces where you can kind of access information and be in without membership fees, without judgment, are places that feel more and more comfortable for families and individuals to come to. So and our goal here is to really make libraries relevant. Sometimes I go out in the community and people are like, "Oh, we still have libraries," and how do we make libraries meet the needs of our community today? And so some of our work has really been about that. How do we try new things, ways of serving to build literacy, and not just in books, but in different things. So I think family libraries can be and are places for learning, places for relaxation, enjoyment,
mm.
and community connection. I think is essentially, for me, is what the core of it is.
Marie, can you start by telling us a little bit about how you and your son use your local library?
Yeah, I started going to our local library a couple months after I had my son. And it was really at a time where, I was on maternity leave and day in, day out, it was the same routine and it was getting really isolating and lonely and repetitive. And I was really just trying to like see how I can step out of my home in a way that benefited both me and my son. And we got this local newsletter that talked about story time at the library. And I originally was like, I guess so. I guess I'll check it out. I don't really have anything else to check out because there's not a whole lot that's appropriate for such a young baby. And I started going, and then I started going on a weekly basis for my entire maternity leave. And we still go less often now that I'm back at work, but still on a somewhat regular basis, whether story time or not. And I think it was a really great way for me to re-engage and have a new relationship with the library. Because growing up, I would access the library, for printing services, to access computers when I didn't have one, to hang out with friends, to volunteer. And now it's kind of become kind of an anchor for me and my son to have a shared activity at such a young age. And what I really liked about story time is, I mean, at the time, my baby was 4 months old, 5 months old, so he didn't care at all about the actual books. He loved the songs, he loved observing, and it was even though the story time was only 30 minutes, it was such a huge relief for me to not have to figure out how to entertain, that someone else was like at their wits' end trying to entertain a bunch of kids. So it was like a really, really great resource for me, and I loved watching him enjoy it too. So it became like a very shared, enjoyable experience for us.
Marie, I wanted to do a follow-up question. How did library access impact your overall well-being?
Yeah, I think coming from the perspective of me re-entering using the library after I had my baby also falls in the context of like how fresh postpartum was for me. I was about like 3 months postpartum, I think, when I started going to the library for story time. And thankfully, I did not have postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, which I understand, are very common for women. Um, but my mental health was still in a state of flux where I didn't really understand my new role now in this life. And it felt like a very sink or swim kind of situation, even though I had support from my partner and other family members. It was also, lonely and isolating. And, I felt like I was still healing, but at the same time, I had to physically show up 110% for my baby. And so it was just a lot to hold in my head. And going to the library kind of gave me an excuse week after week to get out of the home and just not be um, behind four walls, like to go into new environments, to engage with other people, to talk with librarians. So it kind of gave me a little bit of reprieve and an escape um, from the day to day. So I, for me, as like a new mom, it really, really helped me have a better grip of my mental health.
Yeah. It sounds like it was a protective factor for your mental health once you discovered what a library could do for you and your little one.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
it's what's kept me going back week after week. I really enjoyed the break, even though it took work to show up on time. It was actually
Mm,
a lot it was a lot of effort to go to the library with a newborn because, he can't stay awake for too long. He also likes to eat often. So I always like planned it to a T to show up as best as I could. But once I did get
mm.
there, it was we always had a good time. And I loved watching him look at the other kids. I loved watching him explore. And it's always been a positive experience.
Libraries are also not all created equally. I wanted to share another piece of information, and it's from a study, a 2018 study called From Awareness to Funding. I'm going to directly quote from another article on the localnewsmatter.org, which will also be in our show notes. And so I'll go ahead and continue. This study showed that 59% of voters believe that funding for libraries come from non-local sources like state or federal funds, donations, etc., said Jayanti Adelman, the director of library services for Hayward and president of the California Library Association. But the reality is that 86% of funding for libraries come from local funding. Poorly funded libraries are more likely to struggle to serve their communities with the greatest needs. Despite the disparities, Oakland Public Library still managed to be responsive to the community's needs through different programmings. Thanks to a special grant that helped close the funding disparities, 81st Branch in Oakland Public Library has programs like Play Cafe and Fatherhood Circle. So, Anthony, I wanted to spend some time talking about the program you facilitate in the evenings. Can you share how the Father's Circle was created and the impact you have seen in the parents who show up?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the programs that I've been a part of that launched here have come through conversation or organic, having a pulse in the community. So the Father Circle was a discussion amongst fathers at a couple staff and a couple members of the community, as well as a security guard, talking about their young children and changing a diaper and giving advice back and forth, and then a father coming back and asking more questions, and they said, hey, we should start. There are
Mm,
no groups like this for fathers. There's no place for fathers to go to seek information or that knowledge base from other fathers, and to uh, share knowledge about raising children, but also the frustrations and the challenges, the successes. What are the good practices, and what are the ones that aren't so great? How do we work through this together? So we launched the Father Circle. It's been about 6 years now, and we reached out to First Five Alameda County, and they have a fatherhood partnership initiatives program, and we got some funding. We originally went there for some facilitation training,
mhm,
and then got some funding, and now we have 6 years running and running this father circle, and it's open to all fathers. It's a dinner twice a month, first and third Wednesdays. We have stuff activities for children while they're here, so they can bring their kids along with them.
mm,
If they have somebody at home who's generally cooking for them, that person could have the night off or cook for a few less people. um, or they can cook for a few less people if it's them cooking. And we have presenters, but a lot of times it's just the group coming together and sharing a space. We found that there's less of these opportunities for fathers in these spaces. We created an evening program, so if they're working fathers, they can come in. We do activities and photo shoots, and just kind of lift up both the work and the fatherhood, sort of the commitment they have to their children and their families, but also helping to resolve, like, what is co-parenting about? How do we, even if we're in a household with the other parent, what is it? That's a challenging
mm,
thing. And how do we do it when there's conflict and there's custody and child support and hurt feelings, and how do we come together as parents to root for each other even if we have conflict and division, to be able to better raise our children. And because ultimately that's, they're either going to be hurt by these conflicts, or the children's going to suffer both, either concept, they're going to experience the consequences whether they're positive or negative. So I think for us it was really about serving that need. We didn't know it was going to last or take off, and it has. It's really blossomed. We have a nice group of fathers. They tell other fathers word of mouth how to find our group, and they come in. And discussions are rich. There's stuff that I have a hard time hearing, but holding the space
Mhm.
without judgment and letting people be able to share their opinions without, or their perspectives on things without being, you know, jumped on or clashed with right away or judged. Even if you have judgment around that or you don't agree, we can have a space where we talk about that. And I kind of highlight that and feel very proud. And then we've also had fathers in our group who've been coming to this circle for a couple years. They're now facilitating the circle. So now they are helping other fathers in these discussions around raising their kids, getting pointers about what do you have when you have behavioral problems in the school, or what do you do when your court situation isn't working, your family court situation isn't working out for you? How can you seek help for that? And there's not a lot for fathers, honestly. It's really, if they want to, we always say a father wants to be a father. Um, it just, there's things that prevent him from doing so if he's not around. And I think it's trying to help those fathers navigate, and father figures navigate, how do I get into my child's life? How do I make this a better situation? How do I contribute positively to the dynamic of our family to be able to do better for my kid and have access? Some fathers experience tremendous loss because they don't have access and they suffer. There's depression and sorrow in our groups as well. So it's holding all of that and kind of moving things forward. And we had no idea we were going to be doing this at a library, but it's somehow turned into a space. I think Marie talked about it, an anchor space for these fathers to be able to come and find that space to vent, to share their stuff. They don't have to come; they can come or not. They get fed. Their kids are there, and they keep coming back. So I think to me, it feels good, like it's working out okay.
That's beautiful. I didn't realize to the extent of how successful the program is, and I just want to congratulate you and your fathers that come into the program consistently or just show up once. Like that all makes an impact on their lives, and the ripple effect is to their family, their children, and so thank you for sharing that, Anthony. It was really insightful. I wanted to use this next time of our podcast for y'all to think of questions to ask each other.
I have a question for you, Marie, if that's okay. Well, as
Yeah, for
you know, as a user, I always say this at in the library world as a worker, is that we always have to try to figure out, and we will never know, what is it like to be in our patrons' shoes? Like, what do they expect from us? So what is it that when you see a library staff member, what are you looking for? What feels good? What doesn't feel good? I'm just curious about your interactions with
Mhm.
staff, because the spaces are great and we can put on the programs, but those interactions to me are seem essential or vital to the success of the experience and a patron feeling good about it. So, what is it you're looking for? What have you enjoyed about the interactions with staff when you go to the library?
hmm. I think my deeper interactions are with whoever is facilitating story time. Um, and that has been a valuable relationship. That, like, the local librarian who runs Storytime recognizes me and my son, and I recognize
Mm.
her too. So we always say hello. In terms of, like, finding books, and so long as there's someone there for me to ask, hey, I'm looking for kids books, can you point me to where to go? That's really all I need. I think it's different from, like, if you're visiting a store. I don't necessarily need someone coming up next to me like, hey, um, can I help you with anything? Um, like, I don't necessarily need that. Um, Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's your answer. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the piece, Marie, where you brought up that the child librarian recognizes you and your son. Like to be recognized means a lot, I think, to anyone at any age. And especially when you have your little one with you, it makes you feel even extra good to know that you're bringing them to the right places. Like you mentioned, when your son is young, there's not a lot of public spaces that you can physically bring your baby with, but the library just seems to be an institution that comes with open arms. And so I really enjoyed hearing the piece about being recognized as a mother and a parent to a young child. It's always nice. And it's like Anthony said, it's a non judgmental place. It's not like you're getting the side eye, for example.
I'll also add, Anthony, you know, like the librarians are great, but the resources at the library, I think, are what resonates with me more. And that resource includes the librarian who runs story time. Because, you know, like I go there and I see resources about, you know, how to obtain citizenship, or like resources about how to file taxes, or how to get some, you know, feminine hygiene products. And even though when I see that, I'm like, I don't need it, but I'm so glad that that resource is there. Or like I see a sign about like, do you need a free COVID test? Like, you know, I'm so grateful that those resources are there for folks in the community who do need it. And I'm grateful for the people who don't just host story time, but also host playtime. Or there's like a little exhibit about bugs and how they turn into butterflies, you know, how butterflies become butterflies. Like it is such a welcoming environment to me. And everyone who is there frequenting is also just trying to find something for themselves. So even though I don't interact with the other patrons there, it's I still see how it serves them. You know, like on a rainy day when you have nothing else to do, go to the library. Or like I get alerts on my phone like, hey, it's really insanely hot today. If you don't have a safe place to go, go to the library. And so I just want to, you know, contextualize my answer to your question at first, Anthony, is that the librarians aside, the library itself is such a, it feels like such a critical resource.
Thank you for adding that, Marie. Is there any other questions that y'all would like to ask each other?
Anthony, I think I'd like to ask you kind of like what brought you to the library in the first place and what's kept you around for so long.
Serving the community. I mean, I think I was raised this way. My mother was uh, had a helping orientation in her life. She helped people. She was always taking care of families, especially families that were less fortunate or had challenges in their lives. I think what brought me here, my work and my interest was in community and social change and being a change agent. And I'm not, I wasn't a big reader growing up. I didn't really frequent libraries. I did go to college. I got lucky to get through that experience, but what I really came here for was to be able to do the work, to be able to serve the community. And so my focus was around youth and youth development. Uh, um, I kind of got lucky. I got really fortunate. And what's kept me around is the support. I mean, I think like a musician plays a concert and the people clap, or they dance. It's like it's sort of that feedback that you get from your audience or from your colleagues. uh, Things are working. I found a place here, and the funding is secure. I mean, I know we talked about funding, but the funding is secure in at OPL because we are serving in a meaningful way to the community with the resources that we offer, with how thoughtful we are about those resources, and relevant, that people vote to support through parcel taxes. and we're extremely popular. My goal 10 years ago, I was used to tell the director back then that police and fire are considered essential services. How do we make libraries essential? How do you make libraries essential
Mm.
services? And we've cooling centers and hot days, access to computers. We have a computer class going on in our lab right now where people go through a class and get a laptop at the end of that. I run a bike shop
Oh,
out of
wow.
here. There's no bike shops in East Oakland. How do you get people on bikes and that's free? So just being supported to do the things that and doing things that stick, like a good resource that I say everything I throw out there has done well, and so that's what keeps me around. And I enjoy every moment. To be honest with you, it's remembering the patrons. Like this is a two-way street, right? Like I think that connection. I know kids now that have grown up and have gone to college from fourth grade or kindergarten next door, being here long enough and having those experiences and knowing the people and seeing them and the joy and just having that relationship. It's all through relationships. I think we learn these things, and then that also gives us the sort of juice and the energy to continue. That's for
Mm.
me. What really works is serving and knowing and having the relationships with people to know that they're receiving an impact or a benefit from coming here and the work that we're doing.
For both Marie and Anthony, do you have a tip for a parent who wants to go to the library with a young child but may not know where to start or if they should even take a young child who still cries on demand?
Well, I think a tip for a parent, I think just come in and ask. Come in and ask what resources are available, or just show up. We've changed a lot to be welcoming, especially to younger children and toddlers. We have a separate set of rules that allow for you to snack in the library with your with your little ones. Crying is welcome, and I think crying is beautiful when it comes from a child. It's such an expression of their communication, right? And I think just coming in and you'll be surprised if you just come in with your child and just ask about what kind of opportunities, what kind of programs do they have, or books they have, resources they have for small children, and that will usually open up a door. Most of our programs actually are centered for small children. We spend a lot of time thinking about 0 to 5 and those first 5 years and how to get kids acquainted with books and the Schultzer's development. I think is really key. So we really pride ourselves on those services. So come in, ask, and there's a section for you.
Oh, I love that. There's a section for you. I love that. Marie?
I think my tip is in a similar vein. Just like looking if there's a calendar available, just looking at the calendar to see what's there. Um, that alone has probably helped me see like, oh, I think I want to come back on Thursday because there's this event happening. And like I like that some of the events are like, speak to the more cultural pieces that may show up in the community. Like there's like some there I think there was something for Dia de los Muertos. That was cool that we didn't ultimately check out, but I just remember thinking like I think we'd want to go to that. And just knowing that that is there is nice. Like just the security you feel from knowing that that resource is there for you. You know, no judgment, free of charge, no sign up needed, maybe.
Mm.
Like all the other the it just feels like a very barrier free entry to
Oh, I
Thank
resources.
you.
love that.
Mhm.
That's great. And on that same note, Anthony, are there resources that you can recommend for multilingual and multicultural families?
Well, we do have. I mean, I think the play cafes. I think Maria had mentioned that too. Joining, I think there's a lot. Those are centers for multicultural sort of experiences because I think people come from the different backgrounds to those events. We do have books in OPL. We have books in 5 languages. So coming and accessing and finding out where those collections are. They're not everywhere. They're usually, a lot of times they're in the communities. They're trying to reflective of the communities they're in. So each branch has a different collection, and And then I think our staff is multicultural too. I think coming in and experiencing and talking to staff or asking questions about what they may have. I think one of the things that's challenging, I think you mentioned from your mom coming from Mexico and just and learning this library experience doesn't exist a lot in other countries, and so I think sometimes like we're adjacent with two small schools next door, and I think there's a lot of families from Yemen and from other from Mexico and Guatemala, mom speakers, which we don't have a collection in mom, but they
Mhm.
think this is the school library. They don't know that there's resources for them in here too. So it is a particular, I would call it a challenge, but there's a transition and there's a sort of a piece that has to happen to help families understand. And the more families that we get that are coming here from other countries, I think it adds to the multicultural experience, and it informs us on how we need to provide what we need to provide with book collection. Like we didn't have an Arabic collection when we first opened this branch, but we've had the influx of Arabic speakers, and we have to catch up with that. So I think it's
Yeah.
part of it is figuring it out. But I think coming in and sort of expressing what you need. We also have translation services too. If somebody doesn't have or speak the language that any of our staff speak, I think it's we have translation services that we can call up and help navigate what those needs are, and then we can learn and it gives them access to what they're looking for, and at least understanding from us.
Esme, can I piggyback on that from the patron side?
Yes.
So, Anthony, I'm a avid user of the multicultural resources at the library. In my home, my husband is speaks English and Spanish, and I speak English and Cantonese, and these are the languages that we use to communicate to our parents. So it is incredibly valuable and critical for us to pass on these languages so that there can be that multi-generation connection and organic relationship building. And I and how the library comes into play is, through the books. There's in our local libraries, there's bilingual story time, not in Cantonese, but in Spanish. And we do bring our son to that when that is available. And also just in the variety of the books, like um, there are books in those languages that we borrow, that we bring home. And we love that we don't have to buy them, not necessarily because we can't afford them, but because going to a public space and seeing that those languages are already there and is represented just helps normalize to our son that those languages can exist in conjunction with English without question. And it's great because, when I bring my mom to the library, even if the books are in English but are about the culture, she can recognize the pictures even if she doesn't recognize the words. And that is another way for her and my son to have more parallels in their relationship and their experience. I think mixed race families are increasingly common, but it is still hard to find a sense of belonging. And through the books, through what's represented at the library, it feels not just for our son, it feels like there's that like pathway to organically finding that sense of belonging, but for us as a family unit too, to feel like, okay, yeah, we are welcome here. Like another example is like for different heritage months, like this month is API Heritage Month, like we're seeing books about that and they are primarily in English, but it's like the themes that they touch upon, like it's not just like the language piece, but it's also the culture piece. Um,
Mm.
and so that's why my family really, really values the library as a resource to us.
Maria, thank you for that. I think my family. We come from a similar situation. I speak English and Spanish. My wife speaks English and Vietnamese, and their grandmother, my kid's grandmother, only speaks Vietnamese. So we've used the book. The books is super. They're essential to those accessing those things, not just for our own like for our own nucleus or like what we're like, how we're experiencing the world, but also my son wanted to he asked about Hanukkah, and he asked me about that. I was like, well, let's go check out a book from the library so we can learn about it, right? So I think you also touched on that a little bit about with the Asian Heritage Month and other cultural experiences that we may not hold in our household, we can go find them at the library to learn about them. So we can use books for both, I mean, for both my son and me to learn about something new. We could use a book to do that. So I think I mean, that's essentially the core of everything we do, right? Is the stories in the books that we have, what people have written, their stories that they've written and shared with us, so that we can both experience and be familiar with the story, but also we can learn about somebody else, that's not that we don't know, but some cultural experience that we're not familiar with. So thank you for that.
And I saw books about
Yeah,
Ramadan, and I was like, this is great. Because I really don't know anything about it, but I'm so glad that it is there. I'm so glad that this is a kind of normal that my son and our family gets exposed to. And yeah, I mean, it's just really awesome.
To close out this episode, Marie, as a Patreon and a mother to a young child, do you have a favorite book that you read with your son or plan to read with him?
Yeah, I mean, I pulled out the books I recently borrowed from the library to showcase. Um, so I have this one. It's not about anything cultural. It's just a book in Spanish about a big egg, and we read that the other day. Um, Also, not cultural. It's just a book about rabbits in the summer looking at some flowers. But it is in both Chinese and English. And we read that. And we also have this one about the ice cream
Paletero
man.
Man.
Oh, paletero man, no
Yes.
way!
It's, when we were visiting my son's grandparents on my husband's side, we always hear the ice cream truck, you know. So it's kind of like bridging those things, you know. And then lastly, we have the rice in the pot that goes in the pot, and it's literally like a sing song version of the Wheels on the Bus, but it's just about rice.
I've read that.
But rice is like a standard household item here, so I it's so hard to put all these thoughts into words, but like it's just like so much we can expose him to, whether it's through whatever language we choose, whatever theme we choose. There's just so much to learn. There's so much opportunity. Um, so many things to tie into of like just like us building relationships with each other, fostering a sense of belonging, bolstering social emotional well-being, and bridging connections across generations, across cultures, across languages. There's just so much. There's so much.
Thank you both, Marie and Anthony, for joining me today on this episode. I literally have never felt so much more excited to have a child and take them to the library. Like, I cannot believe this right now. But thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. I appreciate y'all. And with that, go visit your local library, y'all. We'll have some links in our show notes on how you can find your local library and talk to us about how it went. Thank you for joining us today on our podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the National Center for Youth Law. To suggest a podcast topic or to express interest in being a podcast guest, please email health@youthlaw.org.